The following content deals with astrology. It is not meant to take the place of therapy or to provide life advice. Opinions expressed are those of the guests. All right, so welcome everybody. Welcome back to Spirit Talkers Beyond the Veil podcast. Today I'm excited to be introducing Erin from Queen Bee Tarot.
Hi. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
So cool.
So I'm going to introduce a little bit about Erin here. She's a professional tarot card reader as well as an astrologer, psychic medium, and clairvoyant with over 35 years experience. You'd never know it looking at her. It's so useful. And she has, as she says in her own words, she's been blessed with unique abilities that allow her to see and understand much more beyond this physical realm. And it's her joy and honor to help people find the answers that they're looking for through all these modalities, which I think is pretty darn cool.
Such an honor. Absolutely. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, and basically just trying to offer people clarity because life can get so confusing. Yeah.
Agree, especially in this kind of weird, turbulent times we're going through, right?
So much happening personally and globally. Absolutely.
So if we can offer things that allow people to get some clarity, right? Or get some help to figure out their focus even.
Mm-hmm. And navigating difficult times is the origin of astrology. It is the idea of using some sort of a system to make sense of the bigger picture. Because we as humans get so lost in the details. You know, things happen and we're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. And so that's the beauty of it. Anytime anyone can give us an outside perspective, it helps us kind of find our footing, figure out what our next best steps are.
Yeah. So we are going to talk about astrology today because I've always found it fascinating. I've had lots of my charts done. I've had lots of readings. Yeah. And I always find it interesting, you know, there's different kinds. There's Western, there's Vedic.
That's a valid question because there are lots of people know about Chinese New Year. We know which animal, which year we're born in. So there's Chinese astrology, there's Vedic, which is tied to India. And there is Western. Western is kind of a mishmash because the development of each of these cultural versions of astrology went mostly uninterrupted. But what happened in the Western world in Europe was that through the domination of the Catholic Church at one point, the original knowledge, the original sacred texts were all lost. So Western astrology is the one that is most detached from its original center point, as opposed to Chinese astrology developed completely uninterrupted. Vedic from India, completely uninterrupted. Whereas, Western is bits and pieces based on original information.
And what is astrology?
That's a really good question. So astrology defined is a system, a very well-marked, organized system through which we can understand and interpret the movements of the sun, movements of the moon, and the other planets. And it is a system that was developed to assign meaning to each planet. So the movement of the moon has an effect on the tides, but also we can predict crops, we can predict flooding and things like that. So originally, the reason astrology was developed was to be able to plan for seasonal changes. Astrology was originally developed 25,000 years ago, simply just by noticing. And anthropologists have found markings on the insides of caves and markings on bones. The earliest markings were keeping track of the moon. You have 13 moon cycles in our 365-day year, and it was by tracking those moon cycles that we could predict last frost. We could predict when annual floods were coming. We could predict when the peak of the summer would be, or when the best time to harvest our crops would be. And so what we're seeing here is a common thread. The common thread was agriculture. And it was through the development of civilizations and agriculture. It was the Neolithic era when the agricultural revolution happened. And instead of humans kind of doing their own thing as hunters and gatherers, the development of agriculture meant that we had to plan. We have to plan by planting seeds. We have to time things perfectly so that we can harvest our crops and feed all of these people within our little civilization. So it started off as a practice of noticing, and it was of vital importance to notice so that we have food to eat over the winter.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've ever heard they call it the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia. Yeah, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The area where the Great Pyramids are in Egypt is basically known as the cradle of humanity, the cradle of civilization, because that's where most of the earliest civilizations on Earth developed. And it was in those societies, Babylonian astrology was the first system of astrology developed, and it was about 2000 BC.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So all these different cultures based on, everybody's environment is going to be different. The environment around the Mediterranean is going to be vastly different than the environment in India or in China, right? And so each of these civilizations kind of started by practicing noticing, but it was the Babylonians and the Fertile Crescent that started to organize it into a system. Yeah, and so that was the original root of the astrology that we know today. Pretty crazy.
It is. It's really cool to think of the history is such a long history, and that it actually had purpose.
It actually had purpose. See, that's the thing. Before the development of what we now know as astronomy and science, before that, it was all theoretical. And the idea was a phrase that you might have heard. It's a phrase repeated throughout Christianity, as in heaven, so on earth. It's the concept of as above, so below. And so humans on earth were looking for significance, but also messages from the gods in the stars. And so when an eclipse happened, without knowledge of what an eclipse is, there was panic. Oh, this is a bad omen, or this is a good omen. So originally it was just noticing and trying to perceive what we thought were messages from the gods, right? And then if something bad happened, we want to appease the gods. We don't want our crops to fail. So maybe if we do nice things or make an offering, we would gain favor from the gods. So this was long before, of course, modern science and modern planetary observations, but that was the idea. It was trying to stay in line with divine will and divine timing. Yeah. So I don't know if you've heard, obviously now when we think of astrology, we think of horoscopes, right? Yeah. The word horoscope is actually a Greek word. Yeah. And so the Mesopotamian area that's kind of in between northern Africa and the Arabic Peninsula, above that is the Mediterranean. And so the Babylonian system of astrology spread to Greece, and Greece prided itself on scholars, philosophers, and they were really, really, really into writing, documenting everything, noting everything, and keeping extensive records in the Library of Alexandria, for example. And it was the Greeks that used the word horoscope, because what they started doing is not only just observing the movements of the sun and the moon, but they would actually watch the horizon in the east and see what zodiac sign was rising. And they started marking the movements of the zodiacs by hours. And that's how we started getting the modern day association of a rising sign. Do you know your rising sign? You said you've done your chart.
I have, but I never remember.
That's okay. So originally the development of astrology and observing the movements of the stars and the moon and such was known as what we would call now as mundane. So mundane astrology is timing events. And if, for example, it was always a king or an emperor who would have their court astrologer, and they would want to know if it was the right time to engage in war, or if it was the right time to claim leadership, or if it was the right time to prosper as a nation. And so they were using this as strategic information to hopefully lead to the prosperity of that civilization and that nation. Yeah. And so mundane astrology is just the timing of events and looking at potential, whether it's a good time or not a good time, right? Based on the omens. And the horoscopes that we now know was developed far later. I mean, we're talking, originally marking the moon 25,000 years ago. It wasn't until 2000 BC that we started applying that to our personal sense of self. Oh, wow. Yeah. So, many, many years of development before we started looking at it on a personal level. And even then, it was only looking at the personal astrology of kings and the families and the descendants of kings to see if they too were born into divine rulership, right?
Isn't that interesting?
It's so funny. Yeah. So it was very political. It was very strategic, and it was very focused on agriculture to start out with.
And now we have the Farmer's Almanac.
That's exactly it. What's really interesting about, you had asked about, there's so many different kinds, for example, Western versus Vedic. It wasn't until the 1700s that modern astronomy was developed. And it was then that astrology was kind of kicked off as a pseudoscience. Now we're looking at the actual movements of the planets. Have you ever heard the term the precession of the equinoxes?
No.
So the Earth, we know the Earth spins on its axis, but it's a slight tilt. And that slight tilt actually does a wobble like a top every 25,000 years. That's called the precession of the equinoxes. So even though technically, for example, I am a Virgo, due to the precession of the equinoxes, the sun was technically in Leo when I was born. Oh, wow. Only Vedic astrology from India, only they follow the precession of the equinoxes with an updated location for the movements of the planets. Whereas Western astrology says summertime is Leo, harvest time is Virgo, and it's just based on the energetic vibe of the season rather than the mathematical specific location of where the planets are right now. So I know that's a whole lot of details, right? But there are differentiations. Yeah. So that Babylonian system of just kind of tracking the movements of the planets spread throughout the world, all the different civilizations that developed over millennia. And each culture took that information and applied it on their own, because not everyone had the same gods. Not everyone had the same spiritual beliefs. Of course, right. So in Greece, a lot of these modern day associations we have of, for example, the planet Mars, the planet Saturn, and things like that, they were given names based off of the deities that they believed in. Whereas Chinese astrology is based on a completely different spirituality, a completely different relationship with gods or divinity or anything like that. And for that reason, the way that, for example, the Chinese organize their astrology, completely different than the Western world because of different faiths. Yeah.
Is that why they use animals? Because I always found that interesting. You're a dog, you're a monkey, you're a rabbit. I'm like,
totally. So that was what was most significant to them, is naming those different periods of time based on animals that they were familiar with. And the idea is, no matter where you look, no matter what culture or civilization, what we are associating is some sort of marker of significance that is associated with either a time of year or an energy. Right. So for example, no matter where you are around the world, springtime is springtime. And you may associate it with a rabbit, for example, or you may associate it with Easter if you're Christian, right? But nonetheless, spring is about new beginnings. And so each different culture would have a different way of describing that, a god it was associated with, or an animal that it was associated with. Yeah. Western astrology implements 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Whereas Chinese astrology implements 5 elements: earth, air, fire, and water, and metal.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah. So again, some of those cultural differences added to a little bit of a unique flavor, a unique story behind their mythology, right?
Just, people now, like you said, we just mainly look at what is my astrology. We're looking at what's going to happen this month. But people actually don't, whether they think that's going to be, your weekly horoscope or whatever it is. It's like it's still based on planets and stars and everything that it used to be based on, but we just don't understand that or see that now.
It is very, very complex. The horoscope you look up in the newspaper is going to be whatever the sun was in when you were born, but that's a 30-day period. And you're not going to be exactly the same as everybody born in that 30-day period. I meant to bring an astrology chart with me, but I forgot. An astrology chart, when we do, for example, a birth chart for someone, is a circular wheel where we've assigned what we're trying to do is almost like a three-dimensional map of you're kind of in the middle of that wheel, and what did the planets look like at the exact moment and location you were born. So for example, if you were born during the night, your sun would be below the horizon. So whatever your zodiac sign is, if you were born at nighttime, you're going to have a different energetic vibration than someone born during the daytime. You're going to have a little bit of a quieter or more receptive personality compared to somebody who was born during this daytime, and they're kind of like, here I am, world, and much more expressive and exuberant. So that's one of the things that I do as an astrologer is I help someone create their birth chart, and then we find out, okay, sure, the sun was in this sign, but what was the moon in? What was Mercury in? What was Venus in? Yeah.
So how is that helpful on a personal level? Because you mentioned that they only used to do that for like kings and royalty and their family, but now everyone can use it. We have access to it now. But how is that helpful for people?
Your birth chart is like a unique fingerprint. It's going to be profoundly different than anyone else, unless they were born within 5 minutes of you at the exact same location. Your birth chart is completely unique. And the particular arrangements of the planets and the moon on that very moment is not going to be repeated for millennia. So profoundly unique. And when we look at your sun sign, what time of the year you were born in, that's just part of your character. But whatever the moon was in, that's your emotions. That's how you experience emotions, and that's how you process emotions. Whatever Mercury was in, that's how you communicate, and it's your thinking style. Whether you're a quick thinker or whether you need time to think about things. Everybody knows about, Mercury goes retrograde. If you were born during a Mercury retrograde, that means that your attempts at communication often are either misunderstood or misconstrued, and throughout your life you have trouble communicating. Wow. Right? So doing an astrology chart for a king or the descendants of a king was going to help them understand, is this person prepared to take over the throne? Does this person have the karmic destiny that is going to be a good omen for our civilization? Or do they have some sort of karma around them that is going to lead to the downfall of our nation? And knowing these things ahead of time helped politicians in the past either hold on to power longer or really plan their strategy moving forwards. Now for us, it's a matter of just trying to figure out, why am I the way I am? Right? Whatever Venus was in when you were born, that's your love language. And I do a lot of relationship counseling with astrology, because often couples will say, I feel so misunderstood. I don't understand. I'm showering love on my partner and they never seem to understand that this is love. They seem to want something else. And I go, okay, what is your love language? Yeah. Right? If your Venus is in Virgo, your love language is acts of service. If your Venus is in Taurus, for example, you probably like to shower your lover with gifts. So if your love language is maybe personal company, but your partner's love language is space, someone with Venus in Aquarius says, I love you by giving you space. I love you by not being clingy. Yeah. I love you by letting you live your own life. But if your Venus is in Cancer, you're going to say, I need you around all the time. I need touches and cuddles. Why are you giving me space? I feel rejected. Yeah. Right? So it's a really neat way of understanding the very complex personalities that we as humans have. It's never a straightforward one-word answer, ever. It's never a one-size-fits-all kind of thing as we would think with just looking up our horoscope in the newspaper. Not even close. Yeah. So the more we develop our understanding of our own personal planets, the more we can understand where we ourselves are coming from. Yeah. And I believe that it is such a profound tool of self-acceptance and the actualization of your authentic spirit in this lifetime. How many times do we go to therapy thinking, I shouldn't be the way that I am? But you are. So if you can lean into it and love it, we want to work with our weaknesses. We want to develop some sort of system in place that, if, for example, we have Mercury retrograde and we're not very good about communicating, how can we work around that? Instead of always feeling like a victim. Nobody ever understands me, right?
I'm starting to get some major insight here into some of my friends. I'm like, okay, right? I think that, yeah.
That's how I first did my chart and had a lot of aha moments. And then my friends are like, do mine. And I was like, okay. And it's so fun to start doing that and start pulling out all of these details and going, oh, now I understand why that person acts the way they do, right? Yeah, it's pretty wild. I love it.
It is wild. And I was going to ask you how you got into it or what drew you to it.
Yeah, it was just following personal interest. I'm in my 40s now. And so in the early 90s, when I was really getting going on this, that was when the internet started being accessible into people's homes. A very rudimentary version of the internet. But yeah, and so just wanting to understand myself better. I always felt like the black sheep in my family. I always felt like I was weird and different. And the more that I learned about astrology, I was able to go, oh, that's how God made me. I don't have to be angry or be down on myself or any of those things, which is so easy as a human. But this profound tool of self-acceptance helped me so much. It became a mission to help other people, especially when I see people struggling with the inability to accept themselves for who they are. If I can empower you to love yourself and live your best life, yes, that's my favorite, right? Absolutely.
You know what I love about that? What you just said is that we are who we are, right? And I love that people can, they can gain an understanding of, well, where I was born, what planets I was under, what stars I was under, what time of day it was. That all factors into it.
It does.
You can't change who you are. You just need to accept and love who you are.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah. And lots of times people set unreasonable goals for themselves, right? The other thing too is that astrology only shows potential, and socioeconomic status as well as your gender can influence a lot of those things, right? Being born female into a country where females do not have much privilege or autonomy means that you can only go so far with the potential that you've been given. But knowing yourself, what is that famous phrase from philosophy? To know thyself is divine. And that is the idea that we are all an expression of the divine. And when we feel so lost, when we struggle to accept who we are furthest away from being aligned with the divine.
I love that. I love that we can talk about this too, because it's so misunderstood. Right? Astrology is so misunderstood. I have so many people that just read the horoscope in the paper and they're like, well, that's not me at all. So of course it's not you. Right. You don't have your full chart. You haven't delved into all the little nuances. So yeah, it's probably not you. It's probably one or a couple people or 100 people or 1,000 people that were born at that exact time that that horoscope is based on. Yeah. So don't just go by that. You've got to go by more factors or figure out what all that is.
Yeah, so astrology to this day, now people are coming to a place of actually integrating it more than they used to, and really tuning into it more, not because it's a science, but because it is a tool of self-awareness. And it's mind-blowing. So many times I will do birth charts for complete and total strangers, people I've never met before. I will write a 15-page write-up and they're like, how do you know? How do you know I had those issues in my family, in my family of origin? How did you know that that would be my ideal career? That is what blows my mind to this day. That these ancient systems developed almost 30,000 years ago have somehow anchored into a truth that can only be measured by energy, not by scientific measurement.
Those people that say, oh, it's just, it's just woo-woo, there's nothing to it, horoscopes are bunkus. I'm like, well, then you really don't know what you're looking at, because there's so much there to be mined. Like you're saying, they used to use it for political realm, and I think they could still do that now.
I am in a lot of groups online where groups of advanced astrologers, we will do charts for political events, and we will predict how those political events will turn out. Presidents in power, political leaders being under, criminal investigation, all of these topics, predicting the outcomes of elections and things like that. You can actually predict with a pretty high degree of accuracy, simply based on the energetic potential. And all of these things come down to, ultimately the ultimate measurement is this situation, is this person, is this planet what would be considered exalted, or are they in their detriment? So some of these original systems developed especially by the Greeks not only assigned an energetic vibration or meaning to each planet, but as I was mentioning, a birth chart wheel, that map that we do to kind of mark where all the planets are at a certain amount of point in time, that wheel is divided into 12, I like to call them pie slices, kind of, and they're called houses. And each house has an energetic vibration, and each planet is considered to be at home in one of those houses. And so, for example, if an old king or something like that wants to predict the best time to go to war or attack their neighbor, then they're going to want Mars, the god of war, to be in the most beneficial house or zodiac sign to really amp up that potential of energy. Whereas if Mars is considered to be in its detriment or debilitated in a house that it doesn't belong in, then we can say that the energetic potential for action or conquest is just not there. It just wouldn't be a good time. We have the same kind of weather reports, the sun is beautiful outside, it's a great day for a picnic, right? And that's exactly the same kind of potential that we're looking at. You could have a picnic when it's raining, it wouldn't be necessarily as much fun. You could still do it.
A little wetter.
A little wetter.
Soggy sandwich.
Yeah. Soggy sandwiches, that's exactly it. Yeah. So it's really, really neat that astrology has become so commonplace, because more and more, you're absolutely right what you were saying. If somebody says, oh, it just doesn't fit for me, well, you haven't gotten deep enough yet. Right? And enough people now are starting to catch on to how incredibly accurate it can be. Bringing that on a personal level is a huge advancement. Right? Because if we compare to thousands of years ago, when only kings and royalty had access to this sort of information, for the average person to have access is, I just think, the coolest thing in the world, right? Make it more accessible and more understanding so it's not so complex. And yeah.
That's actually really powerful when you think about it, because it used to be just for the few, and now anyone has this access, as long as you have either the right person that's guiding you through it, or you have some sort of a knowing of what you're looking at, right?
Yeah, totally. Anybody can pick up a book. There's so many books out there now, but the apps are great because you just put in your birth information and it just tells you everything, really simplifying the process. When I first started doing birth charts, you had to get what was called an ephemeris. An ephemeris is a very thick book, just full of tables of numbers. Oh. tables of numbers. Like, it's wild. But that's how you would flip through it, and you go, okay, whatever day you were born, let's figure out where the sun was, the moon was, Mercury, Venus, and one by one get the information from the tables and mark it on your circular chart, right? Whereas now I can go on this website and punch it in, and boom, it calculates for time zone, it calculates for location, it calculates for all these things. So yeah, making it accessible definitely makes it a better tool of empowerment than it was in previous generations.
And let's talk about that a bit too, because I'm always amazed at technology and how, being sensitives and people that are tapped into certain kind of energy, I'm finding more and more people are able to not only, find an app where they can, tap into their birth sign, their chart, and find out more about them, but there's also just tapping in is so much more prevalent now.
Yes. Yes. And again, a huge part of that is the fading away of organized religion, because organized religion has dominated Western society for so many generations. And the idea behind organized religion is the dogmatic structure of, you read this book, you follow these rules, and maybe you'll get to heaven. Right? But it doesn't help us actualize who we are as individuals or human beings. Now that organized religion is becoming less and less and less influential, in return, kind of like the seesaw, is each individual person wanting to develop their own personal connection to their higher power. And the path to any of that enlightenment or spiritual awareness or anything, it comes from knowing thyself. And it's not going to be written in a book that you, my dear, are supposed to be like this. It's, you've been given these beautiful ingredients. Have fun.
Yeah. I must say, when I had my last chart done, I get a birthday chart every year, like a yearly
solar return chart.
A solar return, yeah. And everything that was on there, I was gobsmacked. I was just sitting there going, what?
Wow.
What?
Yeah.
It almost feels like I don't, this is where I have the difficulty. I'm like, do I have free will? Right? So when you get into that conversation,
yes.
I'm like, well, it doesn't feel like I have free will, because I was born, unless I chose this particular time and place and everything else so that I could be this person.
I love how you said that, because that's what I believe. I was raised Catholic, which is you're born, you do your thing, you die, and you go to heaven. But I couldn't understand why I had memories from hundreds of years ago. And throughout my life, I've been able to remember previous lives. And what I ended up understanding through my knowledge of astrology is that astrology is actually based on the concept of reincarnation. A whole bunch of stuff that we find in your astrology chart, especially your connection to the nodes, the points at which eclipses would have happened, we can see your karmic destiny. And yeah, a big part of astrology is the concept of determinism, that things were predetermined, that there is a certain fated path or fated situations that you will definitely go through in your life. But what I've come to find is that in between we have free will, but it's about basically, you were given this car, you were given this road to drive on. There are going to be predictable bumps in the road, but you have fun. The rest is up to you. So I feel like it's kind of a 50-50 mix, but with the concept of reincarnation, there are many schools of thought around soul contracts. That we, as these little souls, these little flames that come from the sun of source, we're all these little flames that come into the earth to experience self subjectively, to have an opportunity to see what it feels like to be a human from all kinds of different perspectives, and gain this well-rounded experience through many, many lifetimes, in which we're given maybe a life in which we're rich, or a life in where we're poor, a life where we're female, a life where we're male, everything. Yeah. And then we take that experience back to source. And then if you want, you can come back again.
Yeah, I love that interpretation. And because that's my thought, right? And then I don't get into a fatalistic mode where I'm like, well, this is my path and I just have to stick to it, because where would be the fun in that, right?
Yeah, that would not be fun.
No, we're seeing my what'd you call it, solar return.
Yeah.
By seeing that in the chart and knowing that I'm right on track, it actually empowered me, because I went, oh my gosh, I'm doing what I'm here to do. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do.
Yes.
I am fulfilling my purpose.
Yes, that's
That
exactly
felt like,
it.
oh, I can't believe it.
I totally agree. Absolutely. The same goes for self-discovery, knowing that, okay, I was actually meant to be this way. Like, I have been called sensitive in a derogatory way more times than I can count in my life. But when I did my birth chart and found that my moon, representing my emotions, is in my first house of self-expression, that is how I was destined to be. Well, joke's on everybody who made fun of me. I am using my sensitivity to help other people and really actualize my life's purpose here. So if I had let the opinions of other people cause me to crawl into a shell and try and be less than myself, I would have missed the opportunity to step into my destiny. So I love that. And then what you're talking about, that solar return chart, for those who don't know, anytime we're talking about a return, we're talking about the sun or any other planet returning to its original spot when you were born, 5 degrees Scorpio or whatever it was, right? And so when we have any of those returns, it's an opportunity to kind of check in. It's like checking your compass and looking at your map and going, okay, am I on track? What sort of lessons am I completing? What sort of new opportunities are coming up for me? And those are great opportunities to check in with an astrologer or an advisor and kind of get a sense of, did I miss anything? Do I need to be doing anything differently? And those can be such profoundly validating experiences, especially when I do charts for people who are going through crisis. And I can say, actually, this crisis was fated. And then people go, okay, wow, I don't need to feel like a failure with my life falling apart right now. Anyone who is right around the age of 29, expect your life to fall apart on some level, because that is your Saturn return. And Saturn is Captain Serious. Saturn says, what are you doing with your life? And it's a very serious time between 28 and 30 where you basically reconsider every single choice and decision you ever made in your entire life, because you're trying to get serious about what it is you want to accomplish. But it's often a time where people change their career, leave their partner. Basically, all of the decisions you made prior to 28, 29, in your eyes at that moment can often look foolish or immature. It's this kind of like snapping into reality and going, oh my God, is this what I want? Yeah. So a lot of these things can be predicted as far as certain times in your life. You're going to go through a major reassessment or something like that. But a solar return is fun. Just a once a year check in and say, okay, where am I at? What's coming up next? It's very cool.
So what are some of the other major returns? I know with mine, I have one coming up next birthday.
There are. So I mentioned Saturn return, which is one of the biggest ones that we notice because it's right before you turn 30 and it almost feels like a midlife crisis because you are reassessing the most important, serious, long-term decisions of your life. Saturn refers to career, legacy, any estate you're trying to build, like buying a house or any of those really long-term expensive goals and things like that. And it also refers to your desire to find status or to find accomplishments, to find your footing in the world, right? And then it's pretty quiet for a while until you start to hit your late 30s. And what happens is in your late 30s is you hit two very important transits. One of them is your Pluto square. So in astrology, a square is a 90-degree angle. Now, Pluto takes 250 years to do a full return. So none of us are ever going to have a Pluto return in our lifetimes, but we will at approximately 38 have a Pluto square, which means that Pluto is now 90 degrees from its starting point. In astrology, a square is like a mountain that has to be climbed. A sense that we have a very formidable obstacle in front of us, and we know that we need to get over it, but it's I can't. Pluto represents power and control. And it begs the question, do I feel in control in my life? Do I feel empowered in my life? And if not, am I going to choose it or am I going to change it? And so the Pluto square, as we start to approach 40, often feels like this sense of discomfort that we can't really put our fingers on. But it is when we will start to push for a better position at work.
I remember doing that.
Totally. We're like, all right, I'm not a young buck anymore. I'm getting old and I deserve some recognition. I deserve status. I deserve a raise. I deserve some sort of concrete recognition of the energy and time that I'm putting into this. It also comes up in personal relationships. If we feel disempowered in those personal relationships, we're going to start putting the feelers out as far as, do I want to be here anymore? And the next, right around that time also we have, I believe it's the Neptune square. And Neptune asks, am I living my best life? Am I my ideal? Am I happy with, the path that I'm walking? Am I living up to my own standards? So it's a combo. It's a left-right punch right as you approach 40, begging a whole lot of really important questions. Am I progressing the way that I want to? Now, that is an awesome checkpoint to assess, to recalibrate, to think about the direction you're in, to think about the people that you're surrounded by, and how you respond to that. It has a huge effect on the next transit when you're 44. Now, Uranus is like the wrecking ball of astrology. Uranus invites us to make repairs in our lives as necessary, but if we do not take advantage of those checkpoints, if we do not renovate our lives as an ongoing procedure, when we hit 44, we might have to tear it all down. That's the wrecking ball. 44, the way that I describe the Uranus opposition at 44 is kind of like the typical, and this is very stereotypical, the middle-aged guy who divorces his wife, buys a Ferrari, hits the road in an act of complete and total rebellion because Uranus is the rebel. So if you're happy with your life and you've been making necessary changes up until then, 44 is going to be like a turbo boost. Yes, I love who I am. Yes, I love the choices that I'm making. I'm on a super highway to accomplishments. But if you haven't been checking in up until that point, 44 is, I hate everything. Literally everything. And it can be extremely turbulent. Right? It can be extremely turbulent. Yeah, that is the classic midlife crisis, right? And then things get quiet again until 56 and 58. So 56 is right around then is the Chiron return. Chiron is Pluto's moon. So Pluto represents shadow work, whereas Chiron, Pluto's moon, represents trauma work. Chiron is known as the wounded healer. If we face our wounds, if we heal them with compassion and dignity and strength, we can become a healer. Or we can walk, right? Exactly. Or we can walk a path of being healed. So 56 is a point at which Chiron's return brings the most painful experiences of our life to our frontal awareness and asks, have you fixed this yet? Have you healed this yet? Have you acknowledged this yet? So again, if you're doing little bits up until then, you're good. And it'll be a recognition of, ooh, that was painful. I'm glad I worked on it. But if you haven't worked on it, that could be a big crisis where it's often when we have aging parents and we realize that things were left unsaid or things were left unhealed, or we start really reflecting on our birth family, our original caregivers. And then the other thing too is that we're approaching what should be retirement age, not anymore given the economy, but it used to be approaching retirement age and doing that. Okay, let's look back. Let's look back at this wild life that I lived and really reflect on my accomplishments, my achievements, maybe the things I didn't get to do, right? So 56 with Chiron's return is a focus on our painful experiences, whether or not they've been healed. And then 58 is our second Saturn return. So the second Saturn return as we approach 60 is, are you happy with your career? Do you feel as though on a career basis, or for example, buying a home or any of those long-term investments, do you feel like you're where you want to be? But it's a very serious influence. So often, especially in today's economy, it is a time of panicking. No, actually, I still have to keep working. I don't have savings. I don't have retirement. I don't own a home or whatever. There's a lot of panic for a lot of people nowadays at that time, but it should have been, I'm going to rest on my laurels and get ready to take a break. Yeah. So again, socioeconomic status is a huge influence. Astrology only shows potential. Whether or not we can actualize that potential is another story entirely. But these are very predictable transits. And that's the word in astrology. A transit is looking at what the planets are doing now in relation to your original birth chart.
You know, some people may think, oh, this is overwhelming. It's limiting. Like, who am I in all this? But I'm the opposite. I'm like, I love that there's signposts and there's little check-ins and there's things to say, hey, how am I doing?
Totally,
right?
Totally.
Like, oh.
And thankfully, it's not usually all at once.
Yeah.
Right. Thankfully, it's okay. I'm just going to look at this one area of my life. I'm going to give it some attention. I'm going to make any necessary adjustments, give it a couple years, let it settle, let it percolate, and then attack another topic or another question, right? Yeah. The liberation that can be gained through these times, you know, the opportunity to see yourself as sacred, to see yourself as something other than a cog in a wheel. It is definitely a time of, if your career is empty, if you're not doing something meaningful, if you don't feel honored by your partner, those are times of rejecting anything and everything that is not in your highest good or doesn't help you feel good about who you are. Right? It's the search for truth. That's the concept of astrology, is like searching for truth, searching for meaning, and then applying that truth and that meaning in a way that really improves how you can actualize your potential.
We have a blueprint. We come into this lives with our blueprint in place, right? Kind of like a rough idea of where we're going. And then we get to play and have fun and explore. But there are certain points that are just set. Yes. This is what it sounds like to me, right? That these are major check-ins. And it's like, it's so bizarre because part of my brain's going, but like, when was this all put into place? Did I put this into place before I was born here? Or you know, it's kind of like, what did I have in mind? And then my brain starts to go.
It is mind-blowing.
And I'm trying to keep it intact. I'm like, wait a second. Right? But there's also that part of me that's like, this is just way too cool.
Totally.
To know that this was all put in place.
Yeah.
And so that actually gives me a sense of freedom.
Yeah.
Because now I'm going, I can't screw things up that badly.
Totally.
Because it's already there for me.
That's exactly it. I love how you put that. You know, a lot of the pressure that we experience, especially early in life, is the fear of doing things wrong. And wanting to be the best, or wanting to be perfect, or wanting to do things right. And doing things right is often a projection of, well, I want to make my parents proud, right? And one of the things that I counsel people with is, in your birth chart, when we look at Saturn's position, which is associated with career, that is often somebody's first career. But Saturn only promises stability and consistency, not joy. And often I'll do a chart for someone, and wherever Saturn is associated with, okay, well, this is originally what I did. It was just what I was good at, or it was just what my parents said I should do. And then later, as we start to gain that freedom of movement, there's a different point in your chart. It's a mathematically calculated point, not a planet, and it's called the part of fortune. And it was developed within Arabic astrology. The astrology that came out of the part of the world that is now Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, that whole area, the lower Asian bridge between like Asia and Africa, a huge realm of astrology came out of that area, and it's quite unique as well. And they developed a lot of these mathematical points. One is called the part of fortune. One is called the part of spirit. And it's marking with these mathematical calculations a part of your chart that would show the perfect combination of making money and having fun. And so that's where I like showing people, especially if they're going through a career shift in their lives or they're feeling really unsatisfied. Maybe they feel like they're not actualizing their gifts. And I say, okay, let's look at those two spots and let's compare them. So for example, my Saturn is in Virgo, and one of my fallback careers was, see, Virgo is about serving others. Mm-hmm. I was always a waitress, and I had a very successful house cleaning business. In both of those, I did well financially, but I was miserable. My part of fortune is in the 6th house of being a healer, in the sign of Leo, which is my face is my business. And ever since I started really leaning into what I'm passionate about, I am making money and having fun, which when you're younger, you don't even think that's possible. Yeah. You know, so many people are like, oh, well, I do what I love in my free time. I work so that I can have fun in my free time, right? Whereas if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. But often we don't experience the opportunity to liberate ourselves that way until later in life, because I feel like we all kind of need to earn our stripes. I think everybody should have a job in the service industry at some point. It would make humanity a lot different, right? But we just we do our best with what we've got. And then the more that we learn about ourselves, the more that we can be willing to take risks where maybe we're not in a traditional role. Right? Especially as someone who is raised Catholic, I know that my mother has a very hard time with me giving psychic readings and doing astrology for people. Bless her heart, she's really nice about it, but I know that on a theological level, she has a hard time with that, right? So that's a choice that I would not have felt comfortable doing earlier in my life. But now that I'm older, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, right? And I'm not going to worry about getting somebody else's approval.
Interesting that you said that, because in my solar return chart, it actually addressed that there's something that's came in a few years ago, fairly new for me, that's really out there. Mm-hmm. And I'm always afraid to tell people about it. And I'm especially afraid to tell my mother, because she's never really not until now, but she never really supported the mediumship and all the other stuff, because she thought it was too weird. And she's like, well, why are you bulldozing your film career? And I'm like, well, I'm not. And right now I'm marrying them all.
It's an evolution.
I've gotten to the point, and this is the cool stuff, kids, where you start to look at everything you've learned. Oh, here comes Jules again. She seems to come up every single interview. So now I've gotten to the point where it's like, I have taken all these things that I've been doing my entire life, all these things I've loved, like writing and doing film stuff and traveling and my spirituality, and now they're all combining in a super exciting way. And I know that just from here on in, it's just going to be fabulous. It already is. And I've completely changed my life. I've changed the way that I do things day to day, and I'm having fun. Like, there's a joy. The joy has come in. The joy and the income and everything are starting to merge. And it's funny, because my mom, who's a boomer, she's just like, how's that possible? How come you don't have a 9-to-5 job? Are you ever going to get another job? And I'm like, I have 5 jobs. I'm just doing them in my way, at my pace, and from home. I'm just doing them in a different way. Right. But I'm happier. Totally. That just brought to mind, is there like an astrology chart for the planet or for generations? Because I keep seeing that we are progressing. Yes. And maybe that's all part of the power of intent or law of attraction, where we've all dreamt something better for ourselves. I don't know. But also, is that in the charts?
Totally. So Pluto representing power and control, because it moves so slowly. It'll spend about a decade in each zodiac sign. And that's where we start to see the naming of a lot of these generations. For example, I was born in 1980, so I'm still Gen X, and Pluto was in Libra at the time. Whereas people, even my little brother, Pluto's in Scorpio, completely different. So one of the biggest things that I've noticed, especially doing charts for clients that are quite a bit younger than me, is that the millennials were born when Saturn and Uranus were conjunct. So Saturn is the system and the way things are. Yeah. Uranus is the wrecking ball. That whole generation of millennials born just before it turned 2000 and just after are all profoundly influenced by, they are system breakers. They are system busters. everything has changed since then. Coming back to the solar system that we would have learned in elementary school, from the sun, it goes Mercury, excuse me, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. Right. Then there's an asteroid belt. So Mercury moves through a sign, a zodiac sign, every couple weeks, same as Venus. They're really fast. And Mars takes about 2 years to do a circle around a chart. So they all move pretty fast. But when we get past the asteroid belt, next we've got Jupiter. Jupiter takes 14 years to do a full loop. Okay. Saturn is 28.9. And then Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Uranus is something like 80 years. Neptune is something like 100. I can't even remember. I should have written them down. But anyway, those are considered to be the outer planets. And those outer planets are generational influences. So that's where we'll see that a planet is in a particular sign for everybody born within 10 years of you, for example. And that's where we get that vibe that comes through with the boomers versus the millennials versus right, Gen X or anything like that. And anytime those outer planets form a conjunction, which is sitting side by side, the energy of those planets combines, leading to massive systemic change, both personally and globally. We're coming up on a really special one in April of 2026. Saturn joins Neptune at 0 degrees Aries. Now, for those who don't know, 0 degrees Aries is the beginning, the birthplace of the zodiac. It is the original starting point, right? Saturn represents the systems or how things are, and Neptune represents tuning into the divine and walking your highest path, actualizing the highest version of yourself or society around you. So something massive is going to shift. By March, April 2026, we're going to start noticing really big changes. And then ideally what that's going to lead to is a whole new world, because that's the starting point of the zodiac. Wow. It's basically like a reset for the system based on what is the ideal highest path for everyone involved. I'm really looking forward to that. Wow. Really looking forward to that. Yeah. And so often what I'll do as an astrologer is I'll pick out some of these big events that are happening for the collective, and then I'll pull a client's chart and we'll look at what part of your chart that special event is happening. And then that will tell us, based on the house, based on the sign that it's in, how it's going to affect you on a personal level. Wow. Yeah. It's a rabbit hole. I could do this all day. I have so much fun getting into this. I was going to say, okay, so Pluto does 250 years. Yes. The United States as a country is going through its Pluto return. Yes. Huge shift in power, huge question of who has the power and to what ends is it being used. And a massive handoff in power potentially, or the potential for a shift in power this November. If you're American, please go vote. Yeah. So it'll be really interesting to see how that turns out, because especially it's not going to be any ordinary election given the massive significance of Pluto return. It's huge. Fun fact, not many civilizations survive their Pluto return.
Really?
Yeah. The Roman Empire went through a huge shift during its Pluto return. Many civilizations, it's kind of a make it or break it point. Either it collapses under the weight of corruption, or it undergoes a massive transformation and evolves into something better, because Pluto is associated with Scorpio. It's associated with transformation, trial by fire kind of thing. So either the United States faces the corruption and faces the lessons that have been really kind of coming up over the last few years and grows, or it's going to crumble underneath its own weight and completely fall apart. One of the two.
Do the stars say, or the planets say, like, which way it's leaning, or is it just kind of like, huh?
That's a really good question. I've honestly been scared to look. There are quite a few different forums that I'm in where people are starting to talk about it. When I do horoscopes for the collective, typically I only look a couple weeks, couple months ahead, except for some of these big things like the Saturn-Uranus one in 2026. I'm very excited about that. But this election, no, I haven't cast a chart for it yet. I'm afraid to look, but I definitely will, and I could get back to you on that actually. But I remember back when the elections happened 4 years ago, one of the biggest things was doing charts for the candidates, right? And what's interesting is that Biden is actually a Scorpio with his planetary ruler is Pluto, whereas Trump is a Gemini. And so he is going through something completely different. And there was a solar eclipse last year that was exactly conjunct Trump's sun, I believe. In there was some sort of astrological influence. I don't have my notes in front of me, but when an eclipse happens in your chart, often it is the beginning of the end. It leads to downfall. And that was one of the first things people noticed thousands and thousands of years ago, was that, you know, they're tracking the movements of the moon. And of course, it seemed big and scary that there would be an eclipse happen. And of course, it's the gods swallowing the sun, right? Because they don't have science. And that was one of the biggest markers of significant and profound change, is that it's always around eclipses. Eclipses can be like a light switch, where everything just shifts, night and day difference. So it'd be really interesting to hear how things go. Yeah, we've got a couple of eclipses coming up this fall, so.
Oh boy.
Buckle your seatbelts, right?
I know, right?
Yeah.
So one last thing I'll say on all that is that, I mean, that makes sense to me that we're affected by the planets, you know, the stars, the rotation of the earth and everything else, because we're animals, really.
Right.
We're sentient beings, just like this little one here, or the plants or the trees or whatever. So, and they're affected by the moon cycles and affected by the seasons. So why aren't we?
The moon creates a tide, and we as humans are approximately 70% water. So why would we not be affected by the moon either? The water within us is pulled in different directions, right? Yeah, I wouldn't call it a science, but it is, it has its own system. And that's the beauty of astrology. You know, you asked me in the beginning, you know, what is astrology and where did it come from? It is a system of organizing these external stimuli in a way that we can predict them, we can calculate them, we can log them, and we can plan accordingly. Because time and time again, they've been proven to be very accurate, very helpful. And it's better to have a map than not have a map, right? I mean, we could all wing it, but I love feeling prepared, and I love being able to offer that to people as well. I do little horoscopes every day, just giving a quick little blurb on social media about what to expect from the energy of the day. And then every Sunday I do detailed horoscopes available on my YouTube channel. And the way that I write horoscopes, it's so funny. You know, you look horoscopes up in the newspaper and you're thinking, okay, I was born during this month, I'm going to look up that sign. But just so you know, everybody out there who writes horoscopes actually writes them for rising signs. That is how you write a horoscope. Because what I'm doing is, for example, if you're a Pisces rising, then I'm looking at where the houses would be for you. And if Mars is moving through your, you know, fourth house, for example, then I can say, actually, you're probably thinking about moving, because Mars, fourth house, moving your literal home. And so that's how horoscopes are calculated. So anybody out there who's watching, if you are able to look up your rising sign, it's based on what time you were born. If you find out your rising sign, I would encourage you to read horoscopes for your rising sign moving forwards and see if that actually has the accuracy that you've been missing your whole life.
Wow. Good tip.
Totally. Yeah. Well, this has been so much fun. I could talk with you for hours about astrology. This is awesome.
No, thank you so much. And you mentioned that you do an online and horoscope readings, and you have a YouTube channel. So tell people where they can find you.
Absolutely. I have a website, www.queenbeetarot.net or .com. They both go. On my website, you'll find a huge list of all the services that I offer. I offer astrology consultations, tarot readings, classes, coaching, mediumship, and so much more. I also have classes that are available through the city of Nanaimo. They're listed in the activity guide. And for those who are not able to attend in person, I have lots of online classes available on my website as well. I can do readings or coaching or classes from anywhere in the world. So if you're curious about your astrology, if you'd like to learn more, please don't hesitate to reach out, and it would be really fun to connect with you. Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. It's so much fun. I love what I do. I can tell that you love what you do too, which makes it so neat.
Thank you so much for coming and trusting and being, vulnerable. She didn't know who I was, and she came anyway, and just sharing your wealth of information. You've been amazing.
Thank you so much. You too. Absolutely a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
And to everybody else, check us out. The next one, I'm not going to tell you who it is or what it's going to be about. You're just going to have to tune in and see. Thanks for being here.